Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana. There's a lot to talk about in the state of Indiana. It's a somber day to be a fan of sports in Indiana. The Colts lost to the Broncos in devastating fashion. We're going to talk all about that in this episode. The Pacers picked up a pair of major wins, and I think that their weekend was very underappreciated and maybe overlooked compared to some of the news from last weekend. And as we go into next weekend, what's going on? Purdue lost to Texas A&M, Indiana lost to Nebraska. And then we're going to talk about, from a national standpoint, who can win the Super Bowl, who really can win the Super Bowl at this point in the year, which is especially a fascinating conversation now that the Colts are effectively out of the playoff race. There's a lot to talk about in the state of Indiana across the board, but the thing that's most notable to me, what jumps out right away, the first thing that I think about when I think about this past weekend, it's of course the Colts losing to the Broncos 31-13 and effectively losing their playoff hopes. Right away, the immediate thought that comes to my mind, the immediate narrative, is that this was obviously a horrific showing, especially in the second half, and it exposed just about all of the flaws that this team maybe has. It was a massive moment with major consequences, the biggest game of the year, the biggest game the Colts have played since Week 18 last year against the Texans when they fell short in that effectively a playoff play-in game in the last week of the year. And the team fell flat again. And at least against the Texans, it felt like they had some fight. But in this game, on a Sunday, on the road, couldn't get it done. It was poor coaching. It was poor quarterback play. It was poor performance across the board. But that's the bright side, is that at least we know how bad we are, and we know where the problems lie. At least we know where the issues are. And like I said, it seems like the Broncos really exposed just about everything they could possibly expose in this game. Anthony Richardson was 17 for 38 for 172 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Jonathan Taylor had 22 carries for 107 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. had 6 catches for 58 yards himself. The question at this point throughout the week, this episode is late. I recognize that. Throughout the week, we're sort of talking about, you're listening to local radio, you're talking with people in the community, and sort of the vibe that I'm getting is that maybe it's time to implode. And the vibe that I'm getting is that there's a big three in every franchise, right? There's the general manager, there's the head coach, and there's the quarterback. And if you are hitting, if you are perfect, if you're effective in all three of those areas, if your general manager is building a good roster, if your head coach is using those players correctly, and if your quarterback is creating plays the way that they should be, your team's going to be good. Right? The Bills, for example, they have that. The Chiefs, they have that. They have a general manager that's building and sculpting a roster that is built to create success for your coach and quarterback. Andy Reid, Sean McDermott, right there, using those players correctly. And then their quarterbacks are playmakers, and they're incredible, right? Bills and the Chiefs, right away, top two teams in the AFC, they have all three of those things. The Chicago Bears, for example, are a team that maybe has one, right? Caleb Williams maybe is your quarterback, right? He probably is. But general manager, questionable. Head coach, very questionable as well. The Bears are a team that doesn't have, certainly doesn't have a majority of those three things. And that is why they are falling by the wayside. It's a way to take the temperature of a given team. The Bears are bad. They don't have a majority or all three of those things. Bills and the Chiefs are at the top of the AFC. They have all three. The question is it time to implode the Indianapolis Colts? Maybe. And we're going to talk a lot about this, especially as football seasons end. Indiana Notre Dame, one of their football seasons is going to end this Friday. We're looking at a perennially average team floating just under 10 wins, right? The Colts, I believe, had 9 wins last year. They'll probably have less than that, but they could still reach 9 this year. They're in purgatory, right? It's that area in the middle where you're perennially not a playoff team, but you're just underneath it, right? Somewhere between 6 and 9 wins. And the reason why that's so difficult year after year, if you're at the top, you're in the playoffs, you're in Super Bowl contention, you're at the very least in playoff contention, that's great. If you're at the bottom, that's obviously a worse spot to be in, but it's easier to get out of that because you have higher draft picks, and the league is built to prop up the teams at the bottom to keep it at an even playing field. The Colts, again, are going to be in the middle, right? 15th pick, 14th pick in the draft. They aren't able to do very much with that necessarily. And ever since we picked Anthony Richardson, we've been in the middle, right? Right there in purgatory. And it seems like we're stuck there. So the way that teams get out of that is by complete factory resetting. And that's a very difficult decision to make because there's a lot of quality talent. There's a lot of good things. There's a lot of good on the Colts, right? They have a roster talent that is good. It had a lot of hype coming into the year. You look at the receiving room is a great example. Michael Pittman Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce. There's a lot of quality roster talent on this team. There's a lot of quality ground, like a foundation, right? The foundation of the Colts is very good. It's just that they haven't been able to expand upon that in years. Haven't had a division title in years. The Texans have won 6, the Jaguars have won 2, the Titans have won 2, the Colts have won 0 division titles in the last decade. And that's a great example where there's a very good foundation. There's stars on this team. There is good roster talent. They're just not able to do anything with it, and that's because of general manager, head coach, quarterback. Is it one of them? Is it 2 of them? Is it all 3? Is it none of them? Can we just roll into the next year without making any changes? These are the questions that we're going to have to be answering over the course of the offseason. I'm going to go through each one of those 3 points. I'm going to talk about what they struggled with during this game against the Broncos, because again, the Broncos exposed all 3 of these areas for the Colts and plenty more. In this last game, I want to talk about each of the 3, and then I want to talk about whether or not they should make a change, they being the Indianapolis Colts. We'll start with head coach Shane Steichen. He's coming in, right? It's a fresh start for the Colts, recently hired head coach, offensive coordinator for the Eagles, made Jalen Hurts what he is. Steichen's incredible. Offensive, great mind. This is his first head coaching stint, and that is important to keep in mind here. The coaching problems I noticed in this game, the number one thing that comes to mind for me is what in the world was that trick play? And what I'm talking about is with 10 minutes left to go in the game at the Broncos' 40-yard line, the Colts on it was second down, something along those lines, down by 4, right? Approaching field goal range if they weren't in it already. And there's that horrifying trick play where Anthony Richardson pitches it out to A.D. Mitchell. You think it's a screen pass, and then A.D. Mitchell for a second hitches his feet, and you think that he's throwing deep. Then he turns his hips, looks back at Anthony Richardson, goes to throw it back, and it's intercepted by Benito and taken all the way back for a touchdown. That now makes that a moment where you're down by 4 with the ball to now down by 11 with the ball with 10 minutes left to go. And at that point, the Colts were demoralized, and at that point, the game slipped away from them entirely. That trick play, in my opinion, was completely unnecessary. In that moment, you're down by 4 with 10 minutes to go at the opposing team's 40-yard line, and the offense was finally moving. You had to have gotten to the 40-yard line somehow, right? The offense was finally churning. It felt like Anthony Richardson was able to hit some key throws. Jonathan Taylor was picking up some big third and long opportunities around the outside too. And we see this interception that's technically listed as a fumble recovery that completely appalled me. And I was watching the game back in preparation for this episode, so I'm going back through, and I almost forgot how bad it was. And so I'm sitting here alone in my home. There's no one around me, and I audibly gasped because it was bad. And I feel like that in that moment was completely unnecessary. And I want to be careful because I don't want to be the person that looks back on a play and reacts to it knowing the result, right? You could make the argument that if this had worked and it was a touchdown, we would be having a completely different conversation about it, and that's very true. And that's the thing with Dan Campbell a lot of time with the Lions is you say, well, depending on the reaction to the play call depends on the results. And when the play call was made, of course, the coach and the players did not know what the result would be. It's just that I don't think this risk in this moment within the context of the game was necessary. Even if this drive stalls and you kick a field goal, that's perfectly fine. Now you're down by 1. Now the Broncos at best can make it an 8-point game, most likely. You're still within 1 score, right? Absolutely the Colts would have an opportunity to stay in that game with 10 minutes to go. And maybe you just pick up a first down with a traditional play and keep churning and score a touchdown and take the lead, all of those things. That was concerning to me. That in the game was a moment where when we have an offensive-minded head coach, it felt like there should be better decision-making in that moment within that context. The other thing is the lack of discipline, right? It feels like Steichen doesn't quite have the hands on the horns of this team, right? It doesn't seem like he has complete control. There was the whole Anthony Richardson debacle earlier in the year. Jonathan Taylor dropping the ball at the goal line is perhaps the most devastating and embarrassing thing I've seen from the Indianapolis Colts in a long time. The Tyler Gibson drop was what it was last year. It's just unfortunate. It's tragic. It's horrible. I hope we never go through that again. It was devastating, but that's just a play that didn't go our way, right? This was awful because the play did go our way, and Jonathan Taylor was nearly in the end zone, and he dropped the ball right at the goal line. I don't know how that kind of thing is still happening. I don't know how anyone, especially Jonathan Taylor, a veteran, a multiple-time Pro Bowler, arguably the best player on this team, right, outside of maybe Quentin Nelson. Jonathan Taylor in that moment should not be dropping the ball at the goal line, and he did, and that's unfortunate. That's terrible. We could have gone up 2 scores. Instead, and sure, we picked off the pass on the ensuing drive, but that's an opportunity where we never scored again, right? We never got that close ever again, even with a field goal. Could have been up 20-7 over the Broncos on the road in the second half. Instead, we're still only up 1 score, and the Broncos found a way to make their way back into that one. That deflated the momentum for the Colts. It not only took points off the board, it deflated the momentum. It completely altered the vibe of the game, and the Broncos had an opportunity to completely take advantage of that, and the Colts really couldn't bounce back. That was something that I felt was concerning. And then just a loss of a sense of fight and urgency late in this game as the Broncos began to pull away. Really, ever since that pick six and that trick play I was talking about before, it felt like the Colts were giving up, and it felt like the season was over after that interception. Once the Broncos went up by 11, it truly felt like the season was over. And that sense of fight and that sense of urgency for a team that's fighting for their playoff lives and their season lives, it just wasn't there, right? And that is something that, again, I feel like at the end of the day falls on coaching. The one counter argument to that is that he is very offensively intelligent, right? Incredible offensive coordinator, and is supposed to be good with young quarterbacks because of what we saw him do with Jalen Hurts. He could use some more time, and maybe with more time, maybe with a better quarterback, maybe with a different general manager, maybe Steichen in an environment that's more conducive to his strong points, to his fortes. Maybe he's able to make something happen from there. We just haven't seen that yet, and I'm interested to see if really what the Colts do. I doubt they'll get rid of Steichen at this moment after just these 2 years, right? But regardless, he's going to need a change in environment around him, whether it's a different young quarterback to work with, whether it's a different quarterback to work with in general, whether it ends up being Joe Flacco where they pull someone else out from the outside, or whether it is a different general manager, some different roster talent. The Colts are going to have to make changes moving into next year. We thought in the last offseason that they could just move from a year that really doesn't count, right? Anthony Richardson was hurt the whole year. We were playing with Gardner Minshew. We still were on the doorstep of the playoffs, thinking, okay, we can just reset, we can reload, we can refresh, we can take that team, we can copy and paste it into this team, make a couple changes, bring in Joe Flacco, right, and do it again, and it went worse. And that is concerning, of course. It's concerning that when Anthony Richardson was playing the majority of the year, the team was worse. Everything about this season is concerning, and changes now for sure have to be made. We already tried staying stagnant, right? We tried making no changes from one year to the next, and it didn't work. Now something needs to change. I doubt Steichen will be what is changed, but something is going to have to be altered around him in order for him to do his job better, in order for the Colts to be better as a whole. Quarterback, Anthony Richardson, right? He had 2 interceptions in this game. The first one, there was pressure in his face, and he just missed on a 50-50 ball to Pierce. It would have been incredible. It would have been a highlight if that pass was completed. He was just a little bit too strong. That one was picked off over Pierce's head. I don't hate that one from a young quarterback. I think it's fine. I think that he handled the situation under pressure well. He put a pretty decent ball up in the air. I think if that's Michael Pittman Jr. he's throwing to, it's a completion. It was Alec Pierce. Ball is picked off. Broncos take it the other way. That's an issue. That's a problem. But it's an acceptable interception in that game, especially knowing that Bo Nix had 3 himself. The Colts, on the other one, Anthony Richardson made a horrific decision down the left sideline. There were 2 Broncos in the area. It was a bad decision and a bad throw. Sometimes you see bad decisions turn into interceptions. Still a good throw, just not a throw you should be making. Other times you see a great decision, just a horrible ball. This one I feel like was both. And that was a bad interception in a moment where we could not handle another turnover. Balls turned over, and the Broncos effectively sealed the game off of that one from there. First interception, a little bit more acceptable. 1 bad interception in the second half that very much concerned me. That's what we saw from Anthony Richardson. He's been struggling in big moments. He's unreliable. He has some great moments late in games. He won us the game against the Jets. He won us the game against the Patriots, right? But this time, against the Broncos, against a quality opponent, notice the Jets and the Patriots combined have less than 8 wins, right? The Broncos had 8 wins when we played them, so a team better than the last 2 teams we played combined in terms of record. He shrunk, right? He didn't show up, and this is a Broncos team that's not one of the best in the league. Yes, they're going to go to the playoffs. I think they looked very legit, and I think the Broncos look great, and I think they're going to be a real flash in the pan of playoffs, could win 1 or 2 playoff games, and I'm not just saying that because they beat my team, right? I think the Broncos are awesome. But Anthony Richardson, in big moments against good teams, and he's just been unreliable, and he's been unsuccessful across the board. Was recently drafted, right? Recent draft capital and also ticket sales. So those are the two things that we really want to keep Anthony Richardson for. He is mobile. He is someone that is sort of a dual threat quarterback, and if we can improve his ability to throw the football, potentially his life in the league could be much more preserved. We just drafted him, and we used a top 5 pick on him, right? It would really hurt to have to just give up and effectively give away that pick and that capital. And the other thing is ticket sales. And the other thing is passion and investment in the team. We saw what happened when Joe Flacco came in for Anthony Richardson earlier on in the year. Everyone freaked out, and everyone brought science to the game, right? Everyone's talking about it. We need a free AR. We need a free Anthony Richardson. We need to bring him back into the saddle for the Indianapolis Colts after that debacle where he sat out for a play in a big moment. Again, big moment, unreliable Anthony Richardson. If we bring in another veteran quarterback, if we bring in another Phillip Rivers, or if we bring in another Matt Ryan or Carson Wentz, right? If we do that again, whether it's Joe Flacco or anybody else, and sure, Joe Flacco is a better thrower of the football, and I think he elevates this roster better than Anthony Richardson does. It's just better, of course, to invest in your young quarterback who is going to be your future, rather than have another 2-year stint, 1-year stint with another fading, aging quarterback. When you have a roster talent as successful as this one, if we were to do that again, bring back Joe Flacco, or bring in another quarterback from somewhere else that's on his way out of the league, what does that do to the fan base? How does that make the fan base react to say, okay, now for a 6th, 7th year in a row, outside of the Anthony Richardson period, we're going to have to watch another aging and fading quarterback play and probably not have that much success and bring another team to a 9-8 season. There's a lot of risk to keeping Anthony Richardson around, and there's a lot of risk, and I would argue more risk, to giving him up. So that's going to be the question too, because similar to Steichen, Anthony Richardson is very young in the league. This is just his second year, his first year where he's played the majority of the games. He's very young in the league. He was a very recent draft pick. I don't think that we're going to give up Anthony Richardson. I don't think we're going to move away from him. Maybe we start the year with Joe Flacco next year. That's the extent of what I could see happening. And that's fascinating because, again, we're talking about how we need to make a change. We're talking about how something needs to be different about the Indianapolis Colts. Steichen is new and still has a lot of promise. Richardson is new and still has a lot of promise. I don't expect us to make a change in either. So the third member of that big three, right, the third leg of this chair is general manager. And that's Chris Ballard, who now he's been, 10 years in the league, something along those lines. He's certainly had enough time to turn the Colts around and make them a team that is worthy of contending for playoff spots and Super Bowl championships even. And the narrative around the general manager and Chris Ballard at this point is the fact that he's wasting talent. He's wasting players in their prime years. And this is always something that we talk about with teams that have bad coaches or bad quarterbacks. It's look at the talent around your quarterback and head coach that you're wasting, right? Michael Pittman Jr.'s prime years were in them, right? Michael Pittman Jr. has been on this team for the entire duration of the time. Michael Pittman Jr. could be an incredible player in the playoffs. He is the guy. We saw that win against the Ravens last year where he had that helmet catch. Michael Pittman Jr. is the guy that you look for in the playoffs, in Super Bowls. He can be that quality level of a receiver. We just haven't put a quarterback with him and put a team around him that's able to succeed at that level, right? So Michael Pittman Jr.'s prime years, they're being wasted. All of the young receivers in their youngest years in the league, you look at A.D. Mitchell, you look at Josh Downs, you look at Alec Pierce, their prime years are being wasted. Quentin Nelson, he's going to have to retire at some point. Jonathan Taylor, especially with how short the lifespan of running backs is in the National Football League, his prime years are being wasted as well. You see Zaire Franklin, you see Kenny Moore on the defense, right? A lot of players in their prime years of the NFL, their bodies are in tip-top physical shape, the best that they're going to be in, and we don't have good enough quarterback play. We're not coaching the team well enough. We don't have enough, we're not performing at a high enough level to sort of live up to the roster talent that we may have across the board, and that's resulting in our poor seasons and our poor records and our, again, missing of the playoffs, and then not having any hope of winning a Super Bowl or even getting close. General manager, from that perspective, we're wasting talent. Does a change need to be made there? Is that worth it at this time? I don't know. We'll have to talk about it. Same thing with head coach and quarterback. Both are young. Both are new to the team. Is it time to make a change in either of those? I doubt it. But something's going to have to change, and something's going to have to change fast because, again, this team has plenty of roster talent. They have the opportunity to be successful across the board. The Steelers are a great example, right? The Steelers have had their coach. They had been average. They were making the playoffs as a 7 seed. They'd been average forever. Finally, Ben Roethlisberger, he falls off towards the end of the career. Towards the end of his career, rather, he retires. Kenny Pickett comes in. He's not very good. Have a period of time with Mason Rudolph, right? And then they bring in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They fix their issue. They fix quarterback. And look at them now. They're going to go to the playoffs, and they're probably going to have an opportunity to win at least one game and potentially are an outside contender to win a Super Bowl. Colts need to do something like that. They have the roster talent to be successful. Sure, there's holes in this team. They're going to fill them with the draft and free agency. But also, at the top, between head coach, general manager, and quarterback, something needs to be changed. They're in an intense form of purgatory. They're stuck in the middle. Every decision feels wrong. That's why it's so difficult. If you keep Anthony Richardson, it feels like you're setting up your team for failure once again, or at least a lackluster season. And if you move away from Anthony Richardson, it feels like you're going back to old ways that we know don't work, of just putting in another aging and fading quarterback in the saddle and just hoping for the best. Coach, again, Steichen, there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of promise to Steichen. Moving away from him would be concerning, but again, every decision feels wrong. Everything that the Colts could do will feel wrong until it works. And now for another year in a row, it hasn't been working. The Colts are in a bad spot. They're in purgatory, and I look forward to the moment when they finally get out. Okay, let's be a little bit more positive. Let's talk about the Pacers. They nabbed a pair of wins this weekend. They salvaged their record as their tough stretch looms. This two-game win streak may very well salvage the season and reverse the momentum of it, right? They beat the 76ers and they beat the Pelicans, and we're going to talk about what they have coming up because there's a lot of difficult games on the schedule looming, truly, for the Pacers as we get through Christmas and New Year's. The 76ers game, I want to talk about that one first. The Pacers in this game, and the second I watched this game, I was so excited to talk about it because they did everything I said they'd need to do to beat a talented team. They won the turnover battle. They clamped around the perimeter, right? They held the 76ers to under 50% from the field. We know how they've been vulnerable from three and from the field as a whole against opposing teams from a shooting perspective. And Tyrese Halliburton went off, right? He had 32 points and 11 assists. He had 7 threes, 4 of them occurring in the first quarter. That contributed to a strong start and a consistent finish. And we talked about how the Pacers have struggled to start the game off well. They've struggled to jump out to a lead, and they've let up early leads to teams like the Raptors, and they just continue to play consistently, and they keep that lead. They maintain it, and then they end up winning the game. Pacers had the strong start. They had the early lead. Tyrese Halliburton performed like the star he should be. The perimeter defense was much better, and they won the turnover battle, and that's how they beat the 76ers. Yes, it's true that the Sixers were injured, right? Jared McCain, I believe, has a meniscus tear, MCL, something along those lines. He's going to be out for a long time. The 76ers are concerning because their starting five is unbelievable. Paul George, right? Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and Jared McCain. They should be a playoff team. They should be a top 4 seed in the East. They're not, primarily because of injuries. They haven't been able to get all 4 of those players on the floor at the same time for 30-plus minutes, right? They did it one time against the Bulls, and they won. So when those 4 players, and really when that big three of Maxey, George, and Embiid, when they play together, they win. It's happened once. They're 1-0, and the Pacers took advantage of some of those injury struggles, and they were able to beat this team. But I think the Pacers won it. The 76ers didn't lose it, and that's massively encouraging to me. In the Pelicans game, again, star power. Tyrese had a double-double again, right? 21 points, 10 assists. Consistent production from a star is what we want to see. We've been talking all season about how Tyrese Halliburton has struck. He's supposed to be one of these star players in the NBA that elevates their team and lifts them to an opportunity to contend for the playoffs and contend for a championship. Halliburton hasn't been doing that. Now he has. 2 games in a row, right? He has another double-double. He has another 20-plus point performance, and that's especially helped by the fact that Pascal Siakam also put up 22. He led the team in scoring in this game. If Tyrese Halliburton is playing like a star, if Pascal Siakam is playing like a star, or at the very least a very strong supporting cast member, and if the rest of the team is gelling and working around them, the Pacers are going to be great. And that's exactly what we saw last season, right? Tyrese Halliburton was awesome game after game. Pascal Siakam was playing well. And then you see this supporting cast where Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, Miles Turner, they can all work in their own ways on their own areas of the floor, and the team can have success as a whole. But it starts at the top with Halliburton and Siakam, primarily Tyrese Halliburton. 2 games in a row, Tyrese Halliburton played well. He was successful. And what do you know? The Pacers won both times. I understand this is against bad teams, but it's encouraging signs that we can carry with us as we move forward through to the rest of the season. The defense They held the Pelicans to 14 points in the second quarter, 2 points over the course of that final 2 minutes of the first half. Ended the game with 9 blocks as well. Miles Turner had 4. The defense has looked great, right? Again, 2 games in a row. The defense looked good. They, again, holding the Pelicans to 14 points in the second quarter. And again, I understand the fact that the Pelicans are bad, right? They're one of the worst teams in the league, certainly one of the worst teams in the East. I understand that. But the Pacers have had struggles against even bad teams defensively. We saw that stretch the other week where they lost to the Hornets, they lost to the Nets, right? They lost to, and especially down the stretch in that Nets game, defensively they collapsed, right? The Raptors they've lost to twice. That's another bad team that they've just let run up the score on them. Finally, they've locked down against a team like the Pelicans, holding it to so little in the second quarter, allowing the Pacers to pull away. Again, an early lead, taking control of the game, and then maintaining that lead. And mainly just preventing the other team from doing exactly that is exactly how the Pacers have won 2 games in a row as well. And the last thing I want to point out is the return of Andrew Nembhard, because Nembhard came back in this game. He's freed up the guard play a lot. It's not just about Nembhard making plays. It's not just about Nembhard producing. It's about him relieving the pressure on every other guard and every other member of the backcourt to produce at that same level, right? If Nembhard is playing well, everyone else has a little bit less pressure to play well. We see this a lot of times with there's certain guys on certain teams that succeed as a supporting cast member. They succeed as the second best player. They don't have to be a role player necessarily. They need a star in front of them, like Tyrese Halliburton maybe, to do the majority of the work, put the majority of the effort in, and then they can work as that number 2. There's always players that are very good number 2s in basketball. Andrew Nembhard coming back in the backcourt, he scored 17. He did very well on defense as well. He's been a key defensive piece in the backcourt, really, again, helping with some of those opposing team shooting percentages as well. He had 17 in this game, and that allows everyone else in the backcourt to say, okay, that's 17 more points that we are not tasked with, right? And they can work, and then 13 or 10 or 9-point performances are a whole lot more beneficial and a whole lot more acceptable when Andrew Nembhard is hitting, when Tyrese Halliburton is hitting, when Pascal Siakam is firing on all cylinders as well. The return of Andrew Nembhard frees up the guard play. It relieves a lot of that pressure and allows the team to work better as a whole, and that was very evident in this Pelicans game, and I'm excited to see that effect continue throughout the rest of the season. The main thing is consistency, right? This can happen in one game and we won't think much of it. This happened twice in a row. And granted, it was twice in a row against bad teams, but 2 straight strong performances for Halliburton, 2 straight strong defensive performances for the team as a whole. Andrew Nembhard is back. He's going to be successful. The Pacers might be turning things around. And this lull in the schedule where they played the 76ers and the Pelicans, picking up 2 wins, not allowing yourself to drop another game to another bad team, allows the Pacers to have some breathing room in the standings and allows them to work forward and work towards the improvement up to this very difficult stretch of games down the line as we wrap up December, where the Pacers have the opportunity to be inflicted with some major losses against some big-time teams. Where are they in the standings? The Pacers are 12-15. They're 8th in the East at the top of the 8 to 12 logjam, rather. So there's all the teams, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, they all have 15 to 16 losses, right? Very short margin there, all 11 points back, 11 to 12 wins back of the first place, right? Which isn't all that important, but it indicates that 8 through 12 is very tight. It's important because that is the top half of the play-in to safely out of the playoffs, right? That stretch right there, the Pacers are at the top of that heap. That's important. 12-15 with some opportunities to pick up some easy wins before they're going to have a very tough stretch of the schedule ahead of them. It's important that they got these wins. They stay at the top of that heap of teams in 8th place in the East. The Bulls and the Pistons are on their heels. Both have some quality roster talent. Both have the opportunity to pick up some wins. Both have picked up wins against the Pacers in the last couple weeks. The Nets and the 76ers, if they get healthy, can still emerge from below them. So the Pacers have a lot of teams hot on their heels as we approach the second half of the season and get working towards the playoffs and the play-in tournament. The Pacers also can still reach the Hawks. I don't think they will, but the Pacers can still reach the Hawks in 7th place and potentially work towards a home game in the play-in tournament. That's where the Pacers are, right? It's not a bad position, right? If we're talking about play-in tournament, if we're talking about the playoffs, not a bad position to be in at 8th in the East at the top of that log jam, sort of around the bubble of the play-in tournament and the teams outside of the playoffs. That's where the Pacers are, and it's a pretty decent spot to be in my opinion. What do we have the rest of December? The NBA, it's good to look at the NBA month by month, right? They say that the season doesn't start till after Christmas or after New Year's, something like that. If that's true, the Pacers are going to have a real tough start to the unofficial start of the year, right? There's 7 games, and there's 2 distinct stretches. I want to split up these 7 games into 2 stretches. The first one is a West Coast swing. This is important because all these games are on the road, but most of these games are winnable, right? They go to the Suns tonight. So that's important to note. I'm recording this episode on Wednesday. I believe it will come out on Thursday morning. So this game will not have happened yet because they play the Suns on Thursday. The next episode, the Suns game will have happened, but at the time of recording, I will not have known what happened in it. Regardless, at the Suns, at the Kings, and at the Warriors in the next 3 games. That's a manageable grouping of teams, right? All on the road, however, and all very far away from home. I think 2-1 would be very encouraging. I honestly expect 1-2. I don't think we'll win 2 of these games, but if we do, if we continue playing the level that we've been playing these last 2 games at home, at least partially at home, 2-1 would be very encouraging in this West Coast swing. That would make us have won. That would mean that we would have won 4 of our last 5 at that point, maybe 5 of our last 5, but we can swing all 3 of these games, and that would be very beneficial, right? That would be very encouraging to win these 3 games, especially because the second half of December, we got some East Coast challenges. We play the Thunder at home. They're a championship contender. We go to the Celtics twice in 3 days, and then we return home and have the Bucks, right? And that's 3 championship contending teams that we play in a total of 4 games. The Celtics twice on the road. That's where you can't let the season slip away, right? And these next 7 games are important for that reason, because if you go 2-1 in the West Coast swing and then drop all 4 games against some of those championship contending teams in the East, the winner of the East is likely going to be the Thunder, Celtics, or Bucks, right? That's probably what we're looking at. So we're probably looking at and I realize the Thunder are in the West. So the Celtics or the Bucks probably are going to win the East if it's not the Cavs. The Thunder could go to the finals. We could be playing 2 teams in the finals over the course of the next, couple weeks and the rest of this month. To go 2-1 in that West Coast swing allows you to drop all 4 games, be 2-5, and then sort of regroup at the new year and sort of try to work your way back into having a cushion ahead of the play-in tournament. Dropping more than 1 game, honestly, in that West Coast swing is going to set up the Pacers for a very bad spot where they let the season slip away. They go 1-6 or something in this stretch, and then before you know it, you're outside of the play-in tournament range, and the season is somewhat over before it, quote-unquote, starts after the holidays. I want the Pacers to keep the playoffs squarely in mind. We may have to, after this stretch, at the new year, we're going to have a very important conversation because we might have to adjust expectations of the Pacers and what we think they're going to be capable of moving forward if they go 1-6, 0-7, 2-5 in this stretch against some very quality opponents. We may have to adjust the discussion of them and whether or not they are a playoff team and if we should expect that from them, or if they're a team that's in a rebuilding year that we should just look for some positives that don't necessarily correlate with winning games. Either way, this next stretch is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be very interesting throughout the rest of the December, and I'm excited to see if the Pacers are going to be able to get healthy, get some easy wins, and pull away from this pack of average teams, because if they fall by the wayside, the season might be over before it barely starts. Okay, we've got a loss. I know the rest of this episode really is just about teams that lost. Purdue lost to Texas A&M. It was a very tough and physical game in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. This was the Indy Classic. They lost 70-66. Technically a neutral site game, but effectively a home game against a team from Texas. Very tough and physical game. Like I said, it ended in a narrow loss. For me, this is a good loss for Purdue. There's not much to hang your head about. Texas A&M is a great team. Braden Smith had 15 despite getting injured in this game. Like I said, very physical. Lawyer had 12. TKR had 11. Texas A&M looked awesome. From a physicality perspective, they looked legit, and they looked like a team that could really do some damage in the SEC and really do some damage in the NCAA tournament when we get there. We knew that the battle of the boards would correlate with the winner of the game, right? So whoever won the rebounding contest was probably going to win the game at large. That happened. A&M won the game by 4. They out-rebounded Purdue by 11 rebounds, 34-23. It was a palpably physical game. Texas A&M ultimately just was the tougher team at points, right? And looking at Texas A&M, I see a situation where in a neutral site, Purdue away from home, technically in Gainbridge in a big-time game against a ranked opponent, coming off a loss to Penn State. Purdue just fell short once again, but I think it's a good loss. And I made a video. I had a segment in a video clip from last episode titled "Purdue basketball will be totally fine," and I still believe that. I don't think this loss is indicative of larger issues with Purdue. Defense is something that Texas A&M really put together to thwart Purdue's offense. Really, Purdue didn't score for a whole 6 minutes in the second half, partially due to poor shooting, but partially due to A&M just being great across the floor. They truly locked down, and Purdue, again, without that true Mackey Arena home crowd at their backs, fell short and ran out of gas, and that's happened twice now. Right, they go to Penn State, they don't have the crowd at their back, and they lose, and they don't have Mackey Arena with them again, and they lose. And college basketball is known for this. College sports as a whole are known for this. Teams on the road are vastly different from what they are at home. Purdue beat Alabama at home, right? They have some major wins. They beat Maryland at home, which isn't as big of a win, but knowing that they had just lost to Penn State, that is significant. And now Texas A&M, right, away from home, they fall short once again. Aggies went up 12 to close it out after that 6-minute period where Purdue didn't score in the second half. That's really what defined the end of the game. I said that this loss wasn't indicative of a larger problem for Purdue, and that's true. I don't think the season's going to be lost for Purdue. I think this tough scheduling and these early losses are good for the team. Honestly, I believe they're 8-3 at this point. Poor shooting is something that might be indicative of a larger problem for Purdue. They were 45% from the field, 34% from three. It just wasn't good enough, right? And sure, it's an NBA arena, and I only say that, and I don't think this is a real excuse. But, and I talked about this with Indiana playing in the Bahamas, right? And Purdue even playing away from home at a neutral site. Sometimes these NBA arenas, the ceilings are different and the walls are further back. That sounds like it doesn't make any sense, and it probably doesn't, but it does mess with your depth perception and your ability to shoot from three and from the field, truly. And we saw this, again, I mention this all the time, but when Purdue would go to some of those neutral site tournaments, those midseason tournaments in the Caribbean, and they would play in like a casino, and you're shooting and there's no wall behind the backboard. Like there's no stands. You're just shooting to air. It does alter your depth perception, and it does make things difficult to deal with. So because the game was played in an NBA arena away from home, it's a little bit more acceptable that they shot poorly. That's not a real excuse, though. That's probably pseudoscience, honestly. That's probably something I made up as an excuse for Purdue in the past. But sure, NBA arena, they still shot poorly, and consistent high-level shooting away from home will be a necessity because where are March Madness games played? In neutral sites, right? Played in neutral sites, played in a lot of NBA arenas across the board. So away from Mackey Arena, whether it's a true road test or whether it's a neutral site game, Purdue's going to have to step it up from a shooting perspective. And the other aspect of Purdue's poor performance, I would say, in this game is turnovers. Another 16 turnovers in this game. That's 48 turnovers over the last 3 games. That's a detrimental stat that could be indicative of failures in March. If you turn the ball over, you're going to lose to good teams. And it's happened twice now, Penn State and Texas A&M. And Purdue's a good team too, but good teams take advantage of turnovers. They turn turnover opportunities into points. Purdue twice now has turned the ball over at least 15 times, right? 3 times, really, but twice against both in Penn State and Texas A&M games. Those were both losses. They only won by 5 against Maryland at home. They turned the ball over a lot in that game. The turnovers are an issue for Purdue, and it's going to be something they're going to have to get on the same page on. They lose Zach Edey. They lose the lifeblood of their offense. They don't have that player to play through. They're trying to find different ways to sort of move the ball around rather than just working your way to Zach Edey in the post. They're trying to find a way to sort of to understand their offense and comprehend what their goal is going to be from possession to possession. There's still a lot of turnovers. It's still very sloppy. I'm looking forward to seeing if they can improve on that because they're going to have to as they play tougher and tougher competition as Big Ten play carries on. This Saturday, great example, Auburn in a neutral site in Birmingham. They play Auburn in Birmingham. That's a moment where Purdue is going to have to be on top of things, and they cannot be turning the ball over. Otherwise, that game could slip away from them, and this season, as far as it comes to playing against good teams, could slip away from them as well. The positive drawbacks from this game, this was a tough opponent. Texas A&M is very good, and this win is very validating. They were, I believe, a top 15 in the AP poll before they lost their first game of the season to UCF. So Texas A&M could have been a top 10 team if they didn't have their loss to UCF. They could have been one of those teams that's projected to win the SEC and do some damage, make the Final Four, and maybe that's still what they are. That loss to UCF put them off the map a little bit, and then this win over Purdue, I believe, is going to put them back on it. I think Texas A&M is a very legit team, a very valid contender to do some damage in the SEC, do some damage in the tournament, maybe be a Final Four type of team as a 4 or 5 seed, 3 seed SEC team that streaks to the Final Four there. Texas A&M is great. They did expose some of those flaws plaguing Purdue, that shooting away from home, those turnovers. I think that it's important that Purdue is playing so many good teams early on in the non-conference, and that's just props and accolades to Matt Painter for scheduling tough games, right, for this team early on. They're battle testing, they're getting themselves ready for March, and they're going to need it now without Zach Edey and a few other pieces from those Final Four teams from last year. Texas A&M, another team that exposed the flaws of Purdue as they lose early on in the season. Auburn will have an opportunity to do the same. It's the shooting away from home, and it's the turnovers. If they can fix either one of those things against Auburn, I would feel much better about Purdue moving forward. This is just an opportunity to reload and improve, right? Forgive and forget this loss. It's a 4-point loss on a neutral site to a top 20 team that's probably going to be top 10 at some point again this year. This is okay, right? And this is a Purdue team that's not expected to go to the national championship. Last year, they were expected to go at least to the Final Four because they've had a team capable of getting there multiple times in a row, and they never have actually been able to do it. So this year is a year to reload, to improve. They still have some of these guys, some of these upperclassmen for another year, right? Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer. They got some young guys reloading, getting used to the sort of playing on this stage in the Big Ten and in college basketball as a whole. Forgive and forget, move forward, and prepare for a massive test against Auburn, an opportunity to beat another top 2 SEC team from Alabama. If they can do it, then they'll ramp themselves up to a Big Ten bounce back because they're 0-1 in conference play right now, right? Purdue's in a hole in terms of conference play. They're going to have to start racking up wins within the Big Ten. They're ramping themselves up towards that period of their schedule. Forgive and forget, move on. Purdue will be totally fine. They're not expected to do anything crazy like make the Final Four. A loss to a ranked team on a neutral site or away from home here and there is totally acceptable. Still a Purdue team that could make the Sweet 16, and I want them to play at that level moving forward because I think they're capable of it, and I'm excited to see how things play out. Okay, I want to talk about Indiana because the Indiana basketball team, the men's basketball team, went to Nebraska and lost in destructive and concerning fashion. Purdue's loss, I believe, was good. It was a good loss. Indiana had a very, very bad loss, and it's starting to make me wonder if we need to alter the perception of Indiana moving forward and the expectations for Indiana moving forward. I'm concerned. I'm appalled. I'm wondering if the season isn't what it was chalked up to be. Miles Rice had 20. Malik Renew had 12. Amor Ballo had 11 rebounds. That's very impressive. I want to touch on, again, the difficulties of Big Ten road games, right? This was a raucous, difficult road environment to deal with, and the Hoosiers honestly handled it fairly well for most of the game. It was tied at 64 with 9 minutes left, and then came the collapse down the stretch, right? And that's where we see a lot of these negatives accentuated and exacerbated late in that game, in that final quarter of the game. It was tied, and then they shot even worse than they had previously, and they collapsed when it mattered most. Indiana across the board. We talked about Purdue struggling to shoot well away from home. Indiana away from home in this game was 35% from the field and 22% from three. Absolutely horrific numbers, right? Now, they have struggled to shoot away from Assembly Hall across the board this season. It's beginning to be an issue at Nebraska. Tough road environment, Big Ten game. It's certainly an upset spot for Nebraska, and they performed exactly the way they should. Indiana shooting under 40% from the field and under 25% from three is borderline unacceptable in games like this, especially knowing that that is indicative of how they may play against stronger opponents. You think about the Purdues of the world. You think about teams like UCLA, right? Oregon has been playing very well early on this season. In those games on the road or at home, if they shoot that poorly, they're going to get blown away by good teams, and that's going to start to alter the mindset about Indiana and start to wonder if they're a good team themselves and if they're a team worthy of that attention themselves. They collapsed when it mattered most. Bryce Williams went off. He fueled a 21-4 run at the end of the game to finish off the Hoosiers. Again, even on the road, tied with 9 minutes left, at least make it competitive. In that moment, at that point, with 9 minutes left in the game, tied, Indiana should be able to pull out a win on the road. That's what that Indiana jersey looks like. That's what that Indiana roster, that's what that Indiana legacy is supposed to be, is tied with 9 minutes left on the road in a major Big Ten game, especially against a supposedly inferior opponent, go out and win it. And they didn't. They completely collapsed. 21-4 run for Nebraska in that final stretch. This team, meaning Indiana, their lack of experience with one another and their general unstable efforts, they're visible in big games and big moments. That's when it comes to the forefront. That's when it is presented at the front of our minds. The expectation shift is potentially what we need to see with Indiana, right? We come into the year with Indiana, this team was very hyped up. This roster was very hyped up. There was a lot of expectations for how they could do and what they would be as a team. potentially able to do some damage in the Big Ten, potentially able to make the NCAA tournament and do some damage there. Sweet 16 opportunity, IU level team. And this is becoming the type of team that can beat anybody rated below them, but falters and then flounders when tasked with an equal or better opponent. And I call Nebraska an equal or better opponent knowing this game was played on the road. Indiana doesn't have a quality win right now. They don't have a good win. When they played Gonzaga, they collapsed. When they played Louisville, they collapsed. When they played Nebraska, they collapsed. They beat South Carolina, but that's not very much of a quality opponent. Providence is similar to me, not very much of a quality opponent. Indiana doesn't have a good win right now. They beat a lot of bad teams. They beat a lot of average teams. They haven't beaten a team equal or above their strength level, perhaps, and that is something that good teams do. They beat teams better than them, and they beat teams as good as them. Indiana now has had multiple opportunities to do that, right? They went to battle for Atlantis and collapsed. They play Nebraska on the road. They collapse. And Indiana at that point is looking like, again, that team that can beat anyone rated below them, but can't win the big games against good teams. And it's similar to the Indiana Pacers, honestly, and it indicates that there could be an expectation shift that we should see with the Hoosiers where we say, maybe this isn't the Sweet 16 level team that we were hoping for. Maybe this is a team that we want to make the first four, right? Be one of those last teams into the tournament and maybe win a game, right? Or maybe we have to massively shift expectations and call this a rebuild year as they put these transfers onto this roster and sort of try to work from there. This roster and this season going into it as a whole yielded lofty expectations and droves of hype, and this just might not be the year because they can't beat a good team, and they'll have plenty more opportunities moving forward. We've talked in the past about what amassing a roster of transfers could do. I struggle to believe that this Indiana team is ready right now to find previously unforeseen levels of success. I don't know if this team right now, with this amount of new coming transfers and incoming talent, I don't know if this team, this program, right, is with Mike Woodson and with this composition of their roster being primarily transfers, right now early in the year, I don't think they're ready to succeed at the level that we want them to. Maybe they improve it throughout the year. They probably will, right? And maybe we see that opportunity where they pick off a game against Purdue, right? They beat UCLA, something like that. They pick up a major win, safely put themselves in the tournament, work in that 7 to 10 seed range and win a game, and then maybe that's it. Maybe they get it together completely and go all the way. Or maybe they collapse and can never pick up a quality win for the most part throughout the year and end up as one of the top seeds in the NIT, and it's same old IU, and we start to question whether or not Mike Woodson should still be at the head of the table for the Hoosiers. I'm interested to see how the narrative goes, but right now they don't have a quality win, right? There's a brief lull in the schedule. I believe they play Toledo coming up, Chattanooga perhaps. It's winter break, so IU's going to have a lull in the schedule, a couple easy games there. I know they play Chattanooga next. And then they drop into league play full time, right? And then they have that opportunity where it's Big Ten opponent after Big Ten opponent twice a week, right? Tough games, quality games against quality opponents. You got to pick up a couple quality wins early on to establish a cushion in the Big Ten standings, right? Purdue's 0-1 in the Big Ten, for example, right? Indiana, they're 1-1, I believe. Purdue's 1-1, sorry, because they beat Maryland. But Indiana, right? Pick up some major wins early on. It doesn't have to be good teams. It just has to be conference opponents because we know how difficult conference games can be. Go on the road or even at home, hold the fort down, pick up some wins, give yourself a cushion, and make a statement to the committee and say, yes, make a statement to the committee this early in the year even and say, we can beat a good team. We just did it. We can go on the road. We can go outside of Assembly Hall and beat a good team. They haven't done that yet this year. They're going to have plenty of opportunities throughout Big Ten play. That's what I want to see. Indiana's beaten everyone that's rated, everyone they're favored largely against, they've won those games. Great. Pull off an upset. Beat a team better than you. Beat a team equal to you, right? Go on the road and win. It's not something Indiana has done yet this season. Those things I want to see if we're going to continue to expect them to be a tournament level or Sweet 16 level, second weekend level perhaps team this season. That's what I want to see, truly. I just win a big game. Beat a good team. Go on the road and win. Do something like that to show the world that Indiana is legit and is capable of higher levels of success this season compared to recent years. Otherwise, we're going to just continue to expect this IU team to be the same as it has been under Mike Woodson and have a similar level of success or perhaps lack thereof throughout the year. Okay, that's all I have to talk about with Indiana. I want to have some fun. I like to have 5 segments in these shows. 4 of them about teams in Indiana, and then the last one I kind of want to branch out and I just talk about what's interesting to me. At the end of the day, I'm doing this for myself, right? And I want to talk about the Super Bowl. You know, it's what, December. I want to talk about the Super Bowl. I want to talk about the teams at this point going into Week 15 that could win the Super Bowl. The Colts are probably out of the playoff race. Technically, there's a way for them to still get in. It's a bit weird. It's a bit strange. I believe that they'd have to win out, and the Chargers would have to go 2-1. And the Chargers have the Broncos coming up, which is huge. Now suddenly the Colts want the Broncos to win. And then they play, I believe it's the Raiders and maybe the Titans. It's someone bad. It's two bad teams, two easy games. So the Chargers should be able to pick up an easy win. But we need to go 3-0, and we need the Chargers to lose once or twice, I believe, which is just probably not going to happen because, again, even if they lose the Broncos, they'll win one or two of those last couple games. But regardless, there's a way for the Colts to find their way in. I don't think it's going to happen because I think the Chargers are just going to win. They have the Broncos at home too. So the Colts are probably out. But there's 4 teams in the NFL that have separated themselves from the pack. The 4 teams at the top that are most likely to go to and win the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs are the first one I want to mention. They are, I believe, the team with the best record in the NFL at this time. There's some fraud allegations with the Chiefs, right? They've won a lot of close games. They lost to the Bills, one of their only true tough tests. Winning games late is a strength, but is it sustainable? And this is the question about the Chiefs. Are they lucky or are they good in crunch time? And this is something we talked about with Nebraska football in the past, where Scott Frost, was like 3-9, but every single game was one possession, regardless of who they played. Kansas City's like that, except they're winning, right? They're winning these close games. Are they lucky or are they good in crunch time? And is that sustainable? If it's luck, it's not sustainable because they played the Bills and they lost, right? And they'll play teams like the Bills and probably the Bills again in the playoffs and maybe will lose again. If they're just good in crunch time, that's a strength for the Chiefs, right? And that's part of the reason why they're 12-1 at this point and moving forward and ascending and potentially going to be the 1 seed in the AFC despite their loss to Buffalo. Are they lucky or are they just good in crunch time? We'll find out over the course of the rest of the season, and truly we'll find out in the playoffs when they play someone good who's putting on their best show in a win-or-go-home, do-or-die game. The Bills are the next team that have separated themselves from the pack. They're incredible. They're playing their best football despite their loss to the Rams a couple weekends ago. And this win over the Lions was huge, right? This win over the Lions was very encouraging. Josh Allen is an MVP candidate. They can win it all despite losing some pieces. Lost Stephon Diggs, bring in Keon Coleman, right? The Bills roster looks a little bit different. This core roster talent looks a little bit different. Bills are great, and Josh Allen is probably going to be MVP, and the Bills may very well be the best team in the AFC, even if the Chiefs end up with the best record. They just beat the Lions on the road, too, and the Lions are putting on a blackout show for that. Very encouraging win for the Bills. The Bills are legit. Bills might be the best team in the AFC. They might be better than the Chiefs. They did beat the Chiefs, and we'll find out in the playoffs if they can make that happen again. We know how good the Chiefs have been against the Bills in the playoffs and really against the Bills across the board. This year might be different. The Bills have separated themselves from the pack. They could be Super Bowl contenders. They are Super Bowl contenders, and they could very well win it this year. The Lions, I would have considered the best team in the league until they lost to the Bills at home. They've overwhelmed offenses with their pass rush, even without Aiden Hutchinson. Now he's back. It may very well be their championship to lose. That's what I was saying prior to that loss to the Bills. I think the Bills and the Lions are the two best teams in the league, and I think that Super Bowl would be a thrill, and I know that because we watched the game last weekend and saw how much fun that was. The Eagles are the last team that I feel separated themselves from the pack, and I feel that they are the weakest one. I don't think the Chiefs are bad. I don't think the Chiefs are overrated. Well, maybe they're overrated, but I don't think that they are. I don't think they're complete frauds. I think they're good in crunch time. And I think Patrick Mahomes is clutch. And I think that team is clutch. And they have the roster talent to win big games against good teams late, right? And if that means they play down to their competition as well, that's fine. But they're beating good teams too. And I think that the Chiefs, they're beating great teams as well. Only loss being to the Bills, I think, is indicative of their ability to win games. And I think in the playoffs, that's going to allow them to win games consistently until they play another team like this, whether it's the Bills, the Lions, or the Eagles. Until they play a team like that, most likely they'll be winning at home, and they'll continue to win at home until they run into a more difficult challenge. The Eagles, though, they're sneaky successful across the board. Saquon has been awesome coming over from the Giants. They could nab a win over the Lions, right, in the playoffs, or they could just clean up the mess. If the Lions get upset, if the Lions get tasked with someone like the Vikings, and this is a very, very likely scenario, honestly, where let's say the Lions are the 1 seed, right, and the Vikings are the 5, or the Packers are the 6. And it's with two teams in the NFC North being in the wild card round, right? Since they reseed, and since the Vikings would be the 5 and the Packers would be the 6, theoretically, right? It's very likely that one of those teams pulls off an upset against a weaker division champion, and because they'd be the lower seed, it's also very likely that they then get reseeded to go play the Lions. Or if the Vikings are the 5 seed win, they just straight up play the Lions, right? And then in a divisional game, right, against a division rival in the divisional rounds, maybe that's a spot where the Lions get upset. And then the Eagles clean up the mess. They already beat the Packers earlier in the year. Absolutely, I could see that being the case where the Eagles just clean up the mess. The Lions get upset by a division rival, and the Eagles clean up the mess and go to the Super Bowl. That's how they could get there if they don't beat the Lions themselves. The Eagles are capable of both. Those 4 teams, I think, are really the most likely to win the Super Bowl, and I think the Super Bowl champion will be one of them. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Lions, and the Eagles. But then there's a few outside contenders, right? There's a few more teams that could potentially flash in the pan and have success in the postseason. The Steelers. They're in a spot where Russell Wilson is not done yet, right? We thought his career was over. He leaves the Seahawks, leaves Pete Carroll, right? Goes to the Broncos. He was bad. The team was bad. Mike Tomlin is finally soaring. He's finally found a quarterback he gels well with and works well with. Russell Wilson is in the perfect spot for him. Mike Tomlin is in the perfect spot. He's one of the best coaches in the league. In my opinion, he is the best, honestly, at least in terms of long-term success. And he's got a team that's currently leading the division, and they do have a very tough final 3 games. They'll probably be a wild card team. I think the Ravens will surpass them. They play, I believe, this weekend in a massive game. Steelers are outside contenders. They could pull off some upsets. They could pull off some wins. For a long time, we said that the Steelers were good, but they haven't played any division games yet, and they're frauds because of that. They haven't played the Ravens, Bengals, or Browns yet, and once they do, we're going to find out that the Steelers really aren't all they're chalked up to be. And then they started winning those division games, and they continue to be in lead of the division. They continue to be in those top 4 seeds there, I believe, at the 3 at the moment. I personally believe the Ravens will surpass them. I think the Ravens will win the division and have a home playoff game, and the Steelers will go on the road, maybe to play the Ravens. But the Steelers could win at least 1, maybe 2 playoff games. They can beat good teams. Russell Wilson's not done yet. Mike Tomlin is finally succeeding at the level that he deserves to. They could make some noise, especially if they have 1 or 2 home playoff games across the board. Next team, also from the AFC North, the Ravens, right? They're still talented. They're still very talented with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and they've been sort of forgotten, right? I believe they have 5 losses. They're 8-5. They're a wild card team, and once they started racking up those losses and falling out of the top 4, they've been forgotten about. But the Ravens are the Ravens could just straight up win the Super Bowl, and they've done it before as a wild card team where they come out of nowhere and win a couple playoff games on the road, go to the Super Bowl, and then at that point all bets are off. They can go on the road and win. They're known to compete with top contenders. They're known to give some of these top teams a real difficult test. They did it last year in the AFC Championship game. They could get back there and they could win it this time, especially because we don't know if the Chiefs are fully cemented at the top of the standings. Unless the Ravens run into the Bills, and even if they run into the Bills, I feel like they could beat anyone at home and potentially on the road as well. The Ravens are a team that can represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, and I would not be surprised at all, especially if they get some favorable matchups early. It's a great team, and people are forgetting about them. Don't forget about the Baltimore Ravens. As far as the NFC goes, we got 2 NFC North teams. So the North is just great. Now that I realize both of these teams in the outside contender spot are AFC North and NFC North teams. The Vikings, they're 10-2, I believe 11-2 now. They're a wild card team, shockingly, because the Lions are just 1 game better, right? They'll likely have an easy first-round game. They'll likely go on the road and play the Falcons or the Buccaneers or the Rams or the Seahawks, someone like that. And that's difficult on the road, but the Vikings will be able to handle it. Who knows how far they can go after that? Because, as I said, the Vikings could have a spot where they play a weak division champion, and then they play the Lions in a divisional game, or maybe the Eagles, a team that's definitely prone to being upset. Vikings could make some noise. They could find themselves in the NFC Championship game. And whether they're playing the Lions or the Eagles or anyone else, the Vikings can beat anyone. They have beaten most teams. They could go to the Super Bowl. And once you get there, especially if you're a team like the Vikings, all bets are off. Watch out for the Vikings. They could low-key win the Super Bowl this year, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. Packers are a sneaky double-digit winning team in a loaded NFC North. They could play a playoff spoiler as well. They could go on the road, beat the Buccaneers, and then potentially, again, divisional opponent against the Lions. The Lions are almost destined to play the Vikings or Packers if they win, right? Because I doubt the 7-seed Commanders, or whoever's going to fill that 7-seed, I doubt that they're going to spring an upset. Lions are almost destined for a divisional rivalry game in the divisional round. They'll have a week off. They'll be at home, but they'll play teams that play them close all year. Vikings and the Packers, either one of them could play playoff spoiler and knock off the Lions, and that, I think, is the true kryptonite of the Detroit Lions in the playoffs, is their first game. If they can beat the divisional opponent, they can cruise to the Super Bowl. If they can't, we might see a different NFC North team in the Super Bowl, whether it's the Green Bay Packers or the Minnesota Vikings. Either one of them could go all the way. Packers, after that impressive win over the Seahawks, absolutely could go all the way. I'm excited about the Packers, I'm excited about the Vikings, and I'm excited to see what they can both do moving forward. And then some great teams I haven't mentioned yet. The Seahawks were on this list until they fell apart against the Packers, frankly, and the questions about Geno Smith have started to be raised about his health. The Chargers are playing incredible football. They're the 7th seed in the AFC right now. The Broncos go in this list as well. The AFC West, the Chargers, they could spring some upsets. The Broncos, they could spring some upsets. The AFC playoffs is going to be an absolute dream all the way through. The NFC, once you get through the wild card, is when it really gets fun. And then the Texans are a forgotten contender. They've clinched the AFC South. They'll be hosting a playoff game probably as the 4th seed. They've battled injury, but they're still promising. They had a lot of expectations coming into this year. They were supposed to be a Super Bowl contender, and maybe they are. But they've sort of fallen off. They can win one playoff game maybe. I don't expect much from the Texans. I honestly haven't watched them in a while. They haven't been on primetime, right? They just haven't been a team like that. They've been that sort of lackluster 4 seed that wins a weak division. It's exactly what they're doing, winning a division that has the Colts, Titans, and Jaguars in it. Texans could be good, but really the Chargers and Broncos are the teams I'm excited about in the wild card round to potentially beat a team like the Texans and move forward, win a couple road games, and really blow the world up in the AFC. The divisional rounds and across the board, just the playoff. The AFC wildcard round is going to be a dream. The NFC divisional round is going to be unreal. The playoffs are going to be a real treat in both conferences, and we've really gotten to that point in the season where that's on our minds, and that excitement and that hope is sort of filling our hearts, where before we have that drought of football throughout the 6 months of the summer and the winter, the spring, I suppose, we're going to have some real fun football to watch and a Super Bowl champion to crown. Once those wildcard pretenders are weeded out, especially in the NFC, once the NFC West champion's out, once the NFC South champion's out, once the AFC South champion is out, the Texans, it's more than likely all Super Bowl contenders in that final 8 in that divisional round, and then conference championship games in the Super Bowl. There's going to be some mind-blowing games and some mind-blowing moments, and I cannot wait to watch it all play out. I just wish it involved the Indianapolis Colts, and unfortunately, it's not going to. That is all I have for this episode. We talked about a lot. We talked about the Colts. They lost the Broncos, and they lost their playoff hopes. They're going to lose out on this season across the board. Do changes need to be made? Maybe. We will talk a lot about that as the offseason moves forward and as we get closer to the draft. Pacers won a couple games. They won a couple big ones. Those are very, very important, and I believe they could be turning around their season as they have a very difficult end of December ahead of them. Purdue lost, but they'll be totally fine. Indiana lost. They might not be. And there's a few teams that I think could win the Super Bowl, and I think the NFL playoffs are going to be very fun, regardless of if the Colts are involved in it or not. This episode is late. So I'm recording this on Wednesday morning. This episode will come out on Thursday morning. I'm recording again on Thursday morning. That episode will come out on Friday morning. So on the episode that comes out on Friday morning, we're going to preview Indiana at Notre Dame, right? It's going to be day of, but we're going to preview that game. The Titans at the Colts, we're going to preview that, despite the fact the Colts season is likely over. We're going to talk about Purdue playing Auburn. We're going to talk about the Pacers this weekend a little bit more in detail. They play the Suns, they play the Kings. We're going to talk about those two games. And then we're going to do a little bracket. We're going to make the college football playoff predictions, run through our bracket. I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be interesting. And we'll see how close we can get in terms of accuracy there. Moving forward, I expect episodes to come out on Tuesday mornings and on Thursday mornings. So whenever you wake up, you should be seeing an episode on Tuesday and Thursday of the Early Bird. That should be the way that we're consistently moving forward. This episode is late. I apologize. It is what it is. We look to be back on track very, very soon. That is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast. My name is Andrew Garrison, and I will see you guys tomorrow for the preview episode of this weekend.